Jumanji, welcome to the jungle. Just kidding, if they called it that I would have screamed and fired a Sony-branded RPG at the projection screen. Jumanji 2, Welcome to the Jungle is a movie I just watched in theaters the other day. I rarely go to the cinema, and I had to choose between the new Star Wars or Jumanji, and I picked Jumanji, of course. I thought the film was good. Not as good as the first one, but it was still good. For those of you watching, here's a big fat spoiler alert because this theory is going to talk a lot about the plot, revealing the whole thing, basically. I rarely do theories on new films, let alone ones playing in theaters, and even though I've only seen it once, I have taken notes, and I have a few ideas I want to share immediately, so that when it inevitably comes to Netflix, I can revisit it and do a more thorough analysis. Ready? Okay. Hello, I'm the Theorizer, and this week was supposed to be my end-of-the-year special, but I'll save that for January. So, what were the notes I took on Jumanji 2? Well, this film takes place in 1996, right after the previous film. Some kid's dad finds Jumanji on, I'm assuming, that same beach that it landed on in the last film. It didn't float to France, for those of you wondering. He takes it home and his son dismisses it, but then it turns into a video game cartridge, so he'll be more inclined to play it. He then gets sucked in, the game gets put in a school, 4 kids find it, also get sucked in, and we have the story of basically what Alan Parrish went through when he was sucked into the game. Except in Alan's circumstances, he wasn't told to possess a character in the board game, he just fell right into it. If you want a slightly more detailed plot explanation, check out Wikipedia or something. Point is, I have some ideas and perhaps some explanations. Jumanji the video game is very similar to Jumanji the board game, except in the video game you physically have to go into the jungle and go through everything the game tells you to, as opposed to it throwing all of its stuff into our parallel world. See more about that in my other Jumanji video. The board game takes you through a series of obstacles so that you can get to the center. This centerpiece appears to have a direct connection to the jewel known as the Jaguar's Eye and its obviously sentient power. I have complete belief that this supernatural centerpiece is the driving paranormality of the game. It's like this so-called game is a tether to the pocket universe known as Jumanji. I have this nagging feeling that Jumanji was, or is, a real place, perhaps even in Africa, but that it was cursed, perhaps by the jewel, which would give a good reason for Van Pelt's expedition to find it. Yes, I believe that Jumanji is cursed by the jewel. Notice how, once it was stolen, all of the people on the expedition became non-playable characters who just keep repeating themselves. The NPCs are like this because the jewel is around. In the end, the kids escaped and smashed the game apart, but in my opinion, the game will never really be destroyed until the true curse is broken, which of course is caused by the jewel merely existing. They must save everyone inside who are trapped in an infinite loop, saying infinite things and doing infinite actions. You do realize that these 5 kids are possessing some poor people, nabbing all of their thoughts, skills, and knowledge, just because the game felt like becoming a cartridge? Essentially, the Jaguar's Eye controls everything, including people. It belonged to the Jaguar god statue, and all animals were just animals. When it was taken, they all became evil by the command of the one touching it. They need to destroy the jewel to break the full curse, that is, the board game we know as Jumanji. I think I know exactly what happened to cause all of this. The Jaguar's Eye is very much so a sentient thing. It is a conscious entity. Now, this applies to the first film and the second film. The jewel says things to the people from within the board game. It knows when and who to beat drums to, and it knows when to change itself into a cartridge. As I said in my last video, it was a form of voodoo that cursed the game, but now we know it to actually be the jewel that is cursed. But why? Well, here's a mind blow. I bet Van Pelt is a real person. At first I thought the jewel/game was possessed by a gypsy or a voodoo witch doctor or even a god, but then the nature of this film really dawned upon me, and I realized that the game is possessed by Van Pelt. Yes, Van Pelt is the one whose soul possesses the jewel. And no, I'm not talking about how he took the jewel in the game, I'm talking about how, in real life, he found the jewel and stole it from the Africans who protected it and its ties to nature. In many films like this one, supernatural African relics like this are known to be of importance to nature and the surrounding spiritual world. So, to steal it, that would be a problem to everyone. Van Pelt's spirit would be cursed to possess it because he attacked the nature on his expedition, like stereotypical big game hunters are known to do. Don't believe me? Well, most of my evidence will come later when the movie hits Netflix or Blu-ray, but I do have one significantly huge clue that proves this massively, and that is Van Pelt himself. In Jumanji 2 and Jumanji 1, Van Pelt feels like the only real thing that comes out of the game. Everything else is either a repetitive NPC, mindless animals, or weird obstacles, but Van Pelt has a soul. He has control over himself inside of Jumanji. He barely repeats anything, and when Ruby Roundhouse is attacked by snakes, he intensely says, "Game over," blatantly implying that he knows they're in a game. But he's also clearly got a real soul, which means he has control over himself. For those of you wondering more of what I'm talking about, first we have to establish what happened to the jewel. The jewel that we see in Jumanji 2 is not the full jewel. This entire game is the jewel. This object they return is just the center. Jumanji the game was obviously not built like a board game, it's just the jewel itself, which transformed into a game after Van Pelt stole it and got stuck inside. Then his team would have taken the jewel back with them as he fell into a parallel universe version of Africa with his fake expedition team repeating words around him, stuck in a cursed time loop. The cutscene we see in Jumanji 2, which shows Van Pelt stealing the jewel, that happened in real life. The second after he touched it, though, he'd have been sucked into the jewel. He'd gained complete control over it. This is why, even after the kids steal the jewel back from him, he still controls the animals. He spiritually possesses the true jewel, which is the board game. The Van Pelt inside of the game is not physically the real Van Pelt. It's a character of him possessed by him. This also explains why he appears in the form of Alan's dad when he pops out of the game in the first movie. We see in this film that Van Pelt is desperate to escape. He beats his drums around almost any kid because he's getting desperate. All these kids got was detention, not nearly as terrible a life as the first movie's kids. Perhaps if somebody permanently dies inside of the game, then he'll finally be free, and they'll possess it as he is released. Then again, he appears to love his control over animals in the game, and he seems pretty pleased. So yeah, that's my rather layered, complex theory regarding the deepest possible origins of Jumanji I could think up. I'll make a video later this year to follow up and give more evidence, but for now, I'm the Theorizer. Maybe I should do Zathura next. I have this theory that it fell from space for obvious reasons. Maybe the Jaguar's eye has similar origins. After all, Zathura is the novel sequel to Jumanji, and is confirmed to take place in the same cinematic universe as well. I love these thriller adventure films, so intriguing.